WisconsinEye's Campaign 2024 programming is sponsored by Wisconsin Counties Association, Nicolet National Bank, Wisconsin Hospital Association, Operating Engineers Local 139, the Wisconsin Realtors Association, the Wisconsin Laborers District Council, and North Central State's Regional Council of Carpenters. To support programs like this, please consider a tax-deductible donation at wiseye.org/donate or by texting WisEye to 44321.
LuAnn Bird of Hales Corners is the Democratic candidate for the 61st Assembly District. The election is November 5th. LuAnn Bird, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you to the viewers.
Oh, thank you for participating in our candidate interview. What's your campaign's key message? Why are you running for this office?
Well, I can't sit back when I see a problem, and I have a history of doing that. When my husband was paralyzed, I made sure all the schools were accessible because he couldn't get into our kids' school. When we needed sewers in the neighborhood, I got on the commission, made sure we got the sewer in there. And now there's just a lot of problems facing our voters in this state that we need to get things done for. Women's rights, we need public education, we need gun safety. There's a whole host, and I don't sit back when I see those kind of problems, and I won't sit back in Madison either. The political system is broken, too divided, and I want to bring civility back.
So if you're elected, what's an example of a bill that would be a priority for you?
Women's rights. I hear a lot about that at the doors. We had our rights for 50 years, and the fact that right now women can't make their own decisions, daughters can't make their own decisions, wives can't. I mean, it's all, I hear it a lot at the door. So I will be excited to be at the table with the other Democrats in this race that care that we allow the government to stay out of women's decisions, period.
So if you're elected, you know you'll be entering during a biennial budget year, and the state has more than a $3 billion projected surplus. What would be your top two priorities for use of that surplus funding?
Well, I do know that public education has its share of challenges right now, that in the past, over 300 districts have had to go to referendum just for operating. And this year, there's 120 that are going to referendum. So that tells me there's a problem. So I would look at investing in our kids and our teachers, because that's the future. That's our future. And I would also look at issues that affect the poor and healthcare and grocery costs, because those are things that I'm hearing a lot at the doors are really making it tough for hardworking families.
What about taxes? Is a tax cut, tax reform part of your campaign?
I never promised to cut taxes because I just don't want to make promises I can't keep. I think they're looking for candidates they can trust. So what I say is we have to look at the programs we're funding and make sure that we are careful with every dollar that we spend and make sure it aligns with what the voters and what the residents in this district want. So I don't say we're just going to cut taxes, because you're cutting programs. And if you want that, then we need to have a conversation with people, voters. What is it you'd like to cut? But with spending, there's a lot of things we spend money on we don't need to. When money's already allocated to go to clean up PFAS, why should the governor have to sue the finance committee just to get the dollars released? I just think we're not careful enough with our dollars in Madison, and voters need to know that I'll be very careful with that.
You mentioned K-12 education as a leading issue. It's also a key issue for many, many voters. What do you think is going well in K-12 education, and what really needs to change?
The fact that we have good schools almost everywhere is going well, but they have the challenge has been since 1990, when the state said, okay, we're going to take this off, a good chunk of it off property taxes, and the state's going to fund 2/3 of it. And so now what has happened is the state hasn't kept up its promise there, and so that's why a lot of districts are having to go to referendum just to keep the doors open, and I think that's wrong. I do think that we've also got to look at the choice program and how is that affecting the state education systems. In Milwaukee, every student is now funded with public dollars, and none of them are doing that great. So we've got to figure out and stop making a political football out of that, and figure out how we're going to make sure that there's a quality teacher in every classroom with the resources they need to do their job. So I would look at, so as great as our schools are, they're also under attack. And I find that unfortunate. I don't think privatizing public education is the answer. We need strong public schools for democracy. And so I will be a champion to making sure we strengthen our public schools and we strengthen what's happening in the classroom. And the state could target money toward specific programs like third grade reading, so that if we get, and Milwaukee is in my district, a part of it. So if we can target resources that would impact that third grade reading, that can make a big difference in their ability to learn the rest of their schooling years. So those are a couple of the things. And I also want to stop the attacks. We are not indoctrinating our children in our schools. And we need to keep teaching about race, and we need to keep teaching about history as it is. And we got to be careful we're not banning books in our schools. And the community and parents should be very involved in these decisions, and not these outside extremist groups that have been swooping in trying to take over local school boards. So,
what about higher education? The state's 4-year system, 2-year system, technical college system. What should be the focus there for the legislature?
We got to make sure we're strengthening those and not weakening them. And I'm concerned right now that we're closing some of the two-year state schools. When the reason we had those was to allow more people around the state to get their higher education. We also need to look at the technical. They go together to me. I mean, they're both colleges. I am fortunate to have a degree, a technical degree, and then I went to a 4-year college, and then I was able to get a master's. You know, I had the resources to make that happen, and that's critical to the future of working families and the future workforce development, and it's something we've always been proud of is Madison, our state schools. So
I support increased funding for the University of Wisconsin
making sure there's money there, you bet, to make it affordable to students so that they're attracted to come here, and the same with faculty, that we attract faculty to come here.
What do you see as the state's largest workforce development challenge, and what would you do to address it?
Well, we've got a worker shortage, and we've all experienced that. And some of it may be just demographic changes. There's just less people. But I also think we're harming the workforce by attacking the very unions that protect our workers, and by putting barriers to like the right to work laws are not helpful. We need to look at prevailing wage laws. We need to look at how we're treating workers in this state, so that they are getting a fair living wage and the good benefits that they deserve.
Investments in public and energy infrastructure grow our state's economy. This also provides an opportunity to invest in our state's workforce, but currently there are no requirements for hiring local workers. Would you support a state resident hiring requirement for state, local, and utility scale infrastructure investments?
Yes, I would. We need to make sure that we're taking, even when I was on the school board, we did that. We would try to look for vendors that were local, and we would hire those first over someone coming in from out of state. So I have a record of supporting local workers and local industries, yes.
Employee classification is an issue in the construction industry. Some employers misclassify workers as independent contractors or pay them in cash off the books. This lowers costs by avoiding payroll taxes and unemployment insurance, and it puts compliant companies at a disadvantage when bidding on projects. Plus, misclassified workers may be denied minimum wage protections or overtime pay. Are you aware of this issue, and what do you think should be done about it?
You bet I'm aware of that issue. I've heard from many unions about how unfair these laws. And like everything else I've done in my life, when I see a problem, I won't sit back. So I'll work with my colleagues to pass legislation that protects the workers in those cases, and might have to force those employers to classify them correctly. They shouldn't be able to manipulate just to save money and off the backs of the workers. I don't support that at all.
Affordable rental housing is an issue in Wisconsin. Some support government-imposed rent control to maintain affordability, while others argue keeping rent artificially low will decrease rental supply, resulting in increased prices. What is your sense of housing as an issue, and which best addresses rental housing affordability? Is it rent control or building more rentals or some other solution?
Well, I've knocked on over 6,000 doors in the last couple of years, and I know that high rents are a problem. I don't think they're artificially low anywhere, so I'm always going to be careful about, quote, what problem we're trying to solve here. What I do hear is that local governments might want to put some caps on, and I believe in local control, but the state has come in now and said, no, local governments can't put rent caps on. I'm like, how could the state know what's going on in each community? So one thing I would look at is lifting that requirement and allowing local control to happen on this issue. I don't know all the answers to that, but again, I fall on the side of helping people be able to afford to stay in their homes, and I'll do what I can to advocate for that.
Medical systems are facing numerous headwinds in the form of inflation, workforce development, and issues around Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement, resulting in fewer services and even the closure of a hospital system in western Wisconsin. What would you do to preserve access to care and prevent future closures?
That's a complicated issue. Healthcare is very complicated. My husband is paralyzed, and I take care of him. We use the VA system, so I know how important it is to have access to a hospital, because we never know. Just a couple weeks ago, he broke a leg, and there we were having to find a hospital right away, but we've got the VA 10 minutes away, and that's how it should be. So I don't have answers for all of that, but I do know healthcare should be affordable and accessible for all. I do know that the funding of hospitals is very complicated. There's a federal register involved here in how they reimburse hospitals for costs, and that's kind of a mess.
Do you support increasing Medicaid reimbursement
I do.
rates?
I totally do. And I think the more of those federal dollars we can bring in, the more it'll ease some of the strain on the programs we have here in their state.
Mental health care is also a growing concern for many Wisconsinites and for state and county budgets. What are you hearing on this issue in your district, and how would you propose to address mental health care?
I hear that a lot. I hear a lot about it's difficult to find help and it's unaffordable. And I personally have experienced the loss of my nephew last year, who took his life with a gun he shouldn't have had. There are laws that we can pass on gun safety, for example, that at least would have allowed his daughters had gotten the gun away. And he complained to the police, and they were forced to give the gun back. And then last year he took his life. He was 51 years old and had never gotten his mental health issues treated. So it's very near and dear to my heart that we find ways. It's not about the gun, but take the gun away while we get the help that we need. I don't know very many families, even my own, that have needed some help, and it's hard to get. So we've got to find ways from the state level to make sure that there is enough resources available, enough access to mental health care, and that, again, it's affordable. And it's something very, very few people in their life anymore get away with not having some kind of a challenge.
You mentioned this at the top of the interview, but I want to ask you specifically, how should Wisconsin move forward on the issue of abortion? We need to repeal the 1849 abortion law. Let's start with that, and my opponent doesn't agree with that. We need to make sure that the laws that are in place now are also overturned, because at the moment, you have to wait 24 hours. You have to have an ultrasound done. The government forces a person who wants an abortion to go through that, okay? And then it forces a doctor to turn the screen toward the patient. I don't agree with any of that. And one thing overturning Roe v. Wade has done is allowed this conversation to rise up about what is important to women in this state, and it is to keep government out of our healthcare choices, and particularly access to abortion. Should there be any number of weeks?
At what point would a legislator or a judge know when is the right time, how a woman should have an abortion? I just don't think there is any point at which you can say, if you value women and you value that patient relationship with their doctors and their families, we aren't going to put a limit on that. The government shouldn't come in and say, this is when and how. So no, that's what we need to do to take care of women in our state.
Transportation. What are the pressing transportation needs in your district, and how important is it that these needs are addressed and for the state to keep on schedule with the reconstruction of aging interstates and significant corridors of commerce? Well,
living in the Milwaukee suburbs, transportation is a big issue, and I wish we would invest more in some of the high-speed rails and in some of that kind of take some of the pressure off all the highway funding and allowing it easy transportation from the suburbs maybe to the city. There were things we were talking about way back when we could have maybe had a high-speed rail between Madison and Milwaukee and maybe Milwaukee to Chicago. And if we could invest in those kind of things, I think we should be more forward-looking at this rather than continuing to just expand highways. I live with bottlenecks. I have for 10 years while they're fixing one interstate thing. It's going to take 10 years. So the sooner we get to figuring out better ways, I think the better. And we do need to have good infrastructure. If you're going to have workers come from outside into Milwaukee, trucks, all of that, it has to be easier to get through. So
you also referenced PFAS at the beginning of the interview. They're a major PFAS water contaminants, major concern for many Wisconsinites. How do you propose, what's the solution on PFAS?
We need to clean it up, and we need to have strong environmental protections available. I know when I had a sewage problem in my neighborhood, I got on the Sanitary District Commission and was able to work using the Clean Water Fund that we had back then with low-income loans available to install a sewer system like that to protect our environment. Those are the kind of things we need to be doing for PFAS, and we shouldn't be making people wait. If the funds are there now, let's get that going.
Final two questions. How would you describe the leading differences between you and your opponent?
I'm the kind of person that doesn't sit back, that actually has a long history of tackling issues and getting things done that matter to the people and doing it in a fiscally responsible way. In a variety of issues too, by the way. So I care about bringing civility back, about working. I don't look at an aisle in Madison. I see colleagues that we need to work with, and I'm particularly good at talking to people that are not Democrats. So that's where we're really different. My opponent completely supports the Republican platform, and I support the voters at the doors platform. They're the ones we should be focusing on and solving problems for. So that's one of the differences, well, a big difference in the two of us. It's easy to talk about problems, and it's easy to just shoot your mouth off about something, and he's good at that. But he's not good at solving problems, not like I will be. Another good example is he wants to break up MPS, and I say, you're going to have now 4 superintendents that you're going to try to find, and you're going to pay them all 6 figures. How is that going to improve schools in Milwaukee? So we have some very different policy ideas as well.
Last question. Let's say you're elected this fall. You get a magic wand you can use in the state capitol to resolve one issue in a way that brings all parties, all people together. What is that issue?
Saving democracy is very important. And if I could wave a magic wand, I would make sure that nobody in Madison ever passes laws that allow unfair maps, gerrymandered maps, that attack voting rights like what has been going on in the last several years. We're accepting all these limitations. You have to have an ID to vote. Whereas there's been no fraud there, and the election systems work. I think it's very important that we stop attacking those very core democracy processes that we have in place that do work. To me, that's the most important thing. Everything else flows from there. But if we do believe and we get more people out voting, we're going to have a better community and a better state. So that's a top issue for me. We got to get those fair maps and get a process in there that stays.
Well, thank you, LuAnn Bird of Hales Corners, the Democratic candidate for the 61st Assembly District. The election is November 5th. LuAnn Bird, thank you for talking with WisconsinEye.
You're welcome.
This programming is brought to you by our generous sponsors. Thank you for watching.